one of the last debates, you were asked what you would do about foreclosures, and you told moms to hang on. But your advice, as your colleagues have mentioned, was let the economy recover. So you agree with Governor Romney that the way to fix the housing market is to let the foreclosure process proceed more rapidly?
Well, what I agree with is that we have got to stop what we're doing now. When we had the financial meltdown, 50% of the homes are being financed by Fannie and Freddie. Today, it's 90% of the homes. In other words, the government is the backer of the homes. Well, let's take a look and an analysis of what a great, brilliant job Freddie and Fannie are doing. They just applied this week for another $7 billion bailout because they're failing. The other one applied for a $6 billion bailout because they're failing. But what did they do? They just gave bonuses of almost $13 million to 10 top executives. This is the epicenter of crony capitalism. That's what's wrong with Washington, D.C. For these geniuses to give 10 of their top executives bonuses at $12 million and then have the guts to come to the American people and say, give us another $13 billion to bail us out just for the quarter, that's lunacy. Well, we need to put them back into bankruptcy and get them out of business. They're destroying the housing market.
Since you mentioned Fannie and Freddie, Speaker Gingrich, 30 seconds to you. Your firm was paid $300,000 by Freddie Mac in 2006. What did you do for that money?
Were you asking me?
Yes.
Sure, I offered them advice on precisely what they didn't do. Look, this is not...
Were you not trying to help Freddie Mac fend off the effort by the Bush administration?
No, I have never done
Freddie Mac?
I assume I get a second question. I have never done any lobbying. Every contract that was written during the period when I was out of the office specifically said I would do no lobbying, and I offered advice. And my advice as a historian, when they walked in and said to me, we are now making loans to people who have no credit history and have no record of paying back anything, but that's what the government wants us to do. As I said to them at the time, this is a bubble. This is insane. This is impossible. It turned out, unfortunately, I was right, and the people who were doing exactly what Congressman Bachmann talked about were wrong. And I think it's a good case for breaking up Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and getting much smaller institutions back into the private sector to be competitive and to be responsible for their behavior.
Mr. Cain, the government-sponsored entities, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, as Congresswoman Bachmann said, now underwrite or guarantee 90% of the home financing in this country. What would you do with these, with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac? Would you shut them down, even though it could mean higher interest rates for Americans and make it even harder than it is right now for Americans to get home loans?
You don't start there. You start with fixing the real problem, which is growing this economy, which is why I have put a bold solution on the table, 999. Secondly, then you get the regulators off of the backs of the banks, like someone mentioned, get the regulators out of the way such that the small banks and the medium-sized banks aren't being forced out of the business. They would then be in a better position, and they might develop a desire in order to help homeowners reset their mortgages if they were able to see, number three, some certainty. Uncertainty is what's killing this economy, and until we throw out the tax code and put in something bold, get government out of the way by reducing the regulatory environment, we are going to still have the housing problem.
I'm sorry, Mr. Cain, but you would come into office and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac would be there, and the question was, what would you do with them?
Okay, after I did those three things that I outlined, then deal with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Right.
You don't start solving a problem right in the middle of it, so we got to do that first. I would also turn those GSEs into private entities. The government does not need to be in that business. I would find a way to unwind Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac such that the marketplace can determine the future of the housing market.
Governor Huntsman, I want to go back to the issue that you raised before about too big to fail. If anything, that problem has gotten worse since the financial crisis than before. The 10 biggest bank holding companies in this country now hold nearly 90% of all the assets in the banking system, up from 75% in 2006. So what would you do? Would you break up the banks to remove the risk or diminish the risk for American taxpayers?
Let me just say, on the housing discussion here, lost in all of this debate is the fact that there are people tuning in tonight who are upside down in terms of the financing of their homes. They're feeling real pain. People who probably heard today that they lost a job. These issues are very real. They're complicated. For us to say that there's an easy solution to housing, that's just not right, and that's not fair. The economy does have to recover in order for the housing market to pick up its slack and for us to get onto housing starts, which ought to be 15% of our nation's GDP, and today it's 2%. With respect to the banks that are too big to fail, you know, today we've got, as I mentioned earlier, 6 institutions that are equal to 65% of our GDP, $9.4 trillion. They have an implied guarantee by the taxpayers that they'll be protected. That's not fair. That's not right for the taxpayers.
So do you break them up?
I say we need to right-size them. I say in the 1990s, you had Goldman Sachs, for example, that was that was $200 billion in size. By 2008, it had grown to $1.1 trillion in size. Was that good for the people of this country? Or
so how would you accomplish that?
Or were we assuming more risk in the process? I think we ought to set up some sort of fund. I think we ought to charge some sort of fee from the banks that mitigates the risk that otherwise the taxpayers are carrying. There's got to be something that takes the risk from the taxpayers off the table so that these institutions don't go forward with this implied assumption that we're going to bail them out at the end of the day. That's not right, and it's not fair for the taxpayers of this country.
Let's stay on regulation for a moment. You have all said that you will repeal President Obama's health care legislation. Down the line, 30 seconds. If you repeal Obamacare, what's the answer? John Huntsman.
I would sit down and I would meet with the 50 governors of this country. And I'd say, I did health care reform in my state. It took us 3 years to get it done. We delivered an insurance connector that was not a costly mandate. You can sit down with the 50 governors and you can address cost containment. This is a $3 trillion industry, half of which any expert will tell you is totally nonsense and superfluous spending. How do you get cost out of the system? How do you empower patients to better understand what they're getting when they go into the doctor's office? Number two, we need to do a better job in harmonizing medical records so that we can pull up on a consistent basis the most efficacious course of treatment for patients. And third, we need to close the gap on the uninsured without a costly mandate, letting the free market work and bringing people together with truly affordable insurance.
That's time. We want to get each of your comments on what the plan is. Ron Paul.
We need to get the government out of the business, and we do need to have the right to opt out of Obamacare, but we ought to have the right to opt out of everything, and the answer to it is turn it back over to the patient and the doctor relationship with medical savings accounts. So I would say that we've had too much government. I've been in medicine. It's gone downhill. Quality has gone down. Prices have skyrocketed because of the inflation. So you need to get a market force in there, but medical savings account. But this mess has been created, it's a bipartisan mess, so it's been there for a while. So what we need is a doctor-patient relationship and medical savings account where you can deduct it from your taxes and get a major medical policy. Prices then would come down.
30 seconds. Governor Perry.
Obviously, on the Medicare side, you have to have an insurance type of a program where people have options of which give them a menu of options of which they can choose from. I think you have to have the doctors and the hospitals and the other health care providers being given incentives on health care rather than sick care. And then on Medicaid, it's really pretty simple. Just like John and Mitt both know, you send it back to the states and let the states figure out how to make Medicaid work, because I'll guarantee you we will do it safely, we will do it appropriately, and we will save a ton of money.
Mr. Cain.
The legislation has already been written. H.R. 3000. In the previous Congress, it was H.R. 3400. And what that does, it's already been written. We didn't hear about it in the previous Congress because Princess Nancy sent it to committee and it stayed there. It never came out. H.R. 3000 allows the decisions to be with the doctors and the patients, not with the bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. The legislation has already been written.
Governor Romney.
Healthcare in 30 seconds is a little tough, but let me try. Number one, you return to the states the responsibility for caring for their own uninsured, and you send the Medicaid money back to the states so they can craft their own programs. That's number one. Number two, you let individuals purchase their own insurance, not just getting it through their company, but buy it on their own if they want to, and no longer discriminate against individuals who want to buy their insurance. Number three, you do exactly what Ron Paul said. I don't always say that, but I'm going to say it right now. And that is, you have to get health care to start working more like a market. And for that to happen, people have to have a stake in what the cost and the quality as well is of their health care. And so a health savings account or something called co-insurance, that's a way to help make that happen. And finally, our malpractice system in this country is nuts. We got to take that over and make sure we don't burden our system with that.
Mr. Speaker.
Well, I just want to point out my colleagues have done a terrific job of answering an absurd question. To say in 30 seconds...
You have said you want to repeal Obamacare, correct?
Let me just finish, if I may.
30 seconds.
To say in 30 seconds what you would do with 18% of the economy, life and death for the American people, a topic I've worked on since 1974, about which I wrote a book called Saving Lives and Saving Money in 2002, and for which I founded the Center for Health Transformation, is the perfect case of why I'm going to challenge the president to 7 Lincoln Douglas-style 3-hour debates with a timekeeper and no moderator, at least 2 of which ought to be on health care, so you could have a serious discussion over a several-hour period that affects the lives of every person in this country.
Would you like to try to explain? Would you like to try to explain, in simple speak, to the American people what you would do after you repeal the president's health care legislation?
In 30 seconds.
Take the time you need, sir. Take the time you need.
I can't take what I need. These guys will all gang up on.
Do you want to answer the question tonight on health care now, Speaker? Do you want to try to answer the question tonight, Speaker?
Let me just say it very straight. One, you go back to a doctor-patient relationship and you involve the family in those periods where the patient by themselves can't make key decisions. But you relocalize it. 2, as several people said, including Governor Perry, you put Medicaid back at the state level and allow the states to really experiment, because it's clear we don't know what we're doing nationally. 3, you focus very intensely on a brand new program on brain science, because the fact is the largest single out-year set of costs we're faced with are Alzheimer's, autism, Parkinson's, mental health, and things which come directly from the brain. And I am for fixing our health rather than fixing our health bureaucracy, because the iron lung is the perfect model of saving people so you don't need to pay for a federal program of iron lung centers, because the polio vaccine eliminated the problem. That's a very short précis.
Congresswoman.
The main problem with health care in the United States today is the issue of cost. It's just too expensive. And President Obama said that's what he would solve in Obamacare. We'd all save $2,500 a year in our premiums. Well, we have Obamacare, but we didn't have the savings. So what I would do to replace it is to allow every American to buy any health insurance policy they want anywhere in the United States without any federal minimum mandate. Today, there's an insurance monopoly in every state in the country. I would end that monopoly and let any American go anywhere they want. That's the free market. Number 2, I would allow every American to pay for that insurance policy, their deductible, their copay, their pharmaceuticals, whatever it is that's medical related, with their own tax-free money. And then finally, I'd have true medical malpractice liability reform. If you do that, it's very simple. People own their own insurance policies, and you drive the costs down, because what we have to get rid of is government bureaucracy in health care. That's all we bought in Obamacare, was a huge bureaucracy. That has to go away.
Senator.
This is, I think, the difference between me and a lot of the candidates here. I heard a lot of responses, but I haven't seen a lot of consistency in some of those responses on the last few questions. When it comes to health care, back in 1992, I introduced the first health savings account bill that everybody up here said was the basis for consumer-driven health care. I was leading on that before anyone else was even talking about it. Secondly, I was someone who proposed a block grant for Medicaid way back in 1998 with Phil Gramm. Again, leading on this issue. Same thing, reforming the Medicare program back in the 1990s. Again, I led on these issues. I was always for having the government out of the health care business and for a bottom-up, consumer-driven health care, which is different than Governor Romney and some of the other people on this panel. Number two, and I didn't get a chance to answer any of the housing questions. I was on the Banking and Housing Committee in the United States Senate. I was one of 24 people who wrote a letter to Harry Reid saying, please let us bring up this housing legislation, which I voted for in the committee, that would have put curbs on Fannie and Freddie. I was out there before this